On October 31st, 2008, a 16-year-old teenager went missing. Annie McCann did not attend school that day, did not contact anyone, and left a note asking not to be searched for. Less than 48 hours later, a dreadful discovery was made, a discovery that changed a family's life forever. Annie McCann was born on January 5, 1992. At the time of the events, she was 16 years old in high school and lived in the city of Alexandria. Alexandria is a city with just over 150,000 residents located in the state of Virginia in the United States. Annie lived with her father, Daniel McCann, better known as Dan, and her mother, Mary Jane. She had an older brother named Sam, who no longer lived with the family. Sam was attending college in New York. Annie loved to draw and was very good at it. She especially enjoyed drawing religious images, like crucifixes in churches, and also drawings of the family dog, Breezy Max, whom she adored. The McCann family was devoutly Catholic, and Annie went to Mass every day before going to school. According to her teachers, she was an excellent student. She played basketball on the school team, and her parents described her as a funny girl with a lot of personality. Annie was very protected by her parents, who closely monitored her. They had recently allowed her to create a Facebook account with the condition that they had the password and could access her profile whenever they wanted. It's important to note that this happened in 2008, and Facebook had been created just 4 years earlier. It was at its peak and had just become the largest social network in the world. At that time, everyone was on Facebook. Annie was described by her schoolmates as a very introverted and solitary girl. A boy who studied with her said that Annie always had a sweet smile on her face. Although introverted, Annie wasn't a person who avoided others. She was just very shy. Annie used to spend most of her time at home and had few friends. She was also considered a very naive girl who didn't know much about the world. At the time, Annie had just gotten her driver's license, and sometime later, her parents allowed her to use the family car to go to and from school. Her parents said Annie didn't know how to use a cell phone properly. Back then, cell phones weren't as advanced as today's, and the only thing they could really do was make calls. But even then, Annie didn't know how to use them correctly. They also said that Annie almost always got lost while driving, even on the simple route to and from school. She had recently pierced her ears to wear earrings and was treating the ear piercings with a Bactine anesthetic spray. On October 31st, 2008, Annie's father, Dan McCann, left for work. He was a manager at the TSA in Washington. Before leaving the house, Dan went to Annie's room to check on her. He saw the shape of her body under the covers and thought she was still sleeping. This was shortly before 6 a.m. Annie's mother, Mary Jane, who was a former IT employee at the White House and had left her career to become a homemaker, was on her way to the northern part of New York State to visit the couple's older son, Sam, at college. Annie always called her parents when she got back from school to let them know she was home, but that day she didn't call. Her mother found it very strange that Annie hadn't reached out. She then called Annie's cell phone and the home phone several times, but Annie didn't answer. Since Mary couldn't get in touch with her daughter by calling directly, she decided to call a neighbor to check if the family car was in the garage. The neighbor checked the house and said there was no sign of Annie or the car. Mary Jane then immediately called her husband, Dan. He rushed home, and as soon as he entered, the home phone was ringing. Dan answered, and the call was from Annie's school, notifying him that she hadn't attended classes that day. Dan then called the police, and Mary Jane, who had just arrived in New York, took Sam and drove for 6 hours back to Virginia. The police officer who arrived at the McCann family home wasn't very concerned, as he thought that since Annie was a teenager, she had simply skipped school to go somewhere without her parents knowing. Additionally, there was no evidence to suggest that a crime had occurred there. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle in the house. At first, there were also no noticeable missing items. However, despite this, Annie's parents were frantic. After all, it was their daughter who was missing. After a brief search of the house, a note allegedly written by Annie was found in her room. The note read as follows.
This morning I was going to take my own life, but I realized I can start over. I don't want help, and I'm not afraid anymore. If you really love me, you will let me go. I am buying a plane ticket to somewhere far away, and I beg you, please don't look for me. You will think I am in trouble and your instincts will kick in, but please don't do that. Please let me live my life in peace, in freedom. I know I'm very young, but I need this. I love you very much, and I hope you love me too and know me well enough to let me go. Just know that for the first time in my life, I will be happy. I love life, and I'm ready to live it. I hope this is a goodbye for now. Please, let me be free. I will be careful.
In addition to the note found in Annie's room, the McCanns discovered that their daughter had taken with her $1,000 in cash, all of her favorite clothes, some of her and the family's jewelry that she loved, and a box of her favorite cereal. And nothing in the note mentioned where Annie had gone. She likely got ready after her parents left the house, packed her things, wrote the note, and left in the family car. The next day, Annie McCann's whereabouts remained a complete mystery. Then, on November 2, 2008, less than 48 hours after Annie was reported missing, Detective Sean Jones of the Baltimore Police Department responded to a call at the Perkins Homes housing project. This location was over 80 kilometers from the McCann family's home. A man who was taking out the trash found the body of a white teenage girl behind one of the dumpsters at the site. There was no apparent cause of death, and no visible signs of trauma on the teenager's body. While searching the area, Sean Jones found a black backpack near the body. He opened the backpack and found a Fairfax County school pass and a driver's license with the name Annie McCann. At this point, the identity of the body was no longer a secret, and Detective Sean Jones drove personally to Alexandria, Virginia, to deliver the news to Annie's parents. The parents were confused and shocked. The investigation into the case was handled by the Baltimore Police Department in Maryland, since the body had been found there. Annie didn't know anyone in Baltimore, and according to her parents, she could barely make it from home to school and back without getting lost. So what was Annie doing there? In the dumpster next to the girl's body, an empty bottle of Bactine was found. Annie had been using Bactine spray daily on her ear, which, as you know, she had recently pierced. The police carefully examined the bottle and noticed something strange. The cap, which wasn't a screw-on cap but a press-on one, had been removed with considerable force. Annie's DNA was found on the open edge of the bottle, and this DNA came from her saliva, but what was strange is that there were no fingerprints on the bottle. In other words, everything suggested that Annie had put her mouth on the bottle cap, but without using her hands. However, if she wanted to open the bottle, it would have been impossible for her to do so using only her mouth. A few days later, the police found the white Volvo, which was Annie's family car that she had used to run away from home. The vehicle was abandoned at a gas station in Baltimore. When they did a forensic examination of the car, the police found a fingerprint that didn't match Annie's. This fingerprint was entered into the police database, and they were able to track down the owner. It belonged to Darnell Kinlaw. The police went after Darnell and took him in for questioning. During his interrogation, Darnell claimed that he and a few friends had found the car in the Perkins Homes housing project, with Annie's body inside, face down in the back seat. Darnell also stated that the girl was already dead and that he and his friends just wanted to use the car for a drive. So they threw Annie's body behind the dumpster where it was found and went for a ride in the car. Although this story seemed very strange, the police didn't have any physical evidence connecting Darnell and his friends to Annie's death. There were no signs of a struggle, such as blood splatter, either in the car or on Annie's body. Additionally, the police found the $1,000 that Annie had taken when she left home. The money was inside the car, along with Annie's clothes and personal belongings. Nothing was stolen. Therefore, after a quick check, Darnell and his friends were ruled out as suspects. A few days later, the results of the autopsy on Annie's body came out, and the report was shocking. The report stated that Annie had not suffered any trauma, and there were no signs of injuries of any kind on her body. She had a small amount of alcohol in her system, but a large amount of lidocaine. The amount of alcohol was so low that it was considered negligible by authorities. Lidocaine, a common anesthetic found in products like Bactine, received more attention from the authorities. Annie had been using Bactine to treat her pierced ears, and the amount of lidocaine in her body was significant. According to Detective Sean Jones, if the Bactine bottle had been used to poison Annie, the cap must have been forcibly removed. The presence of the victim's saliva on the edge of the bottle was an important clue. The Baltimore medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was lidocaine poisoning. However, it was unclear whether the ingestion was forced or if Annie took it willingly. The police then closed the case, declaring that Annie had taken her own life by ingesting nearly 200 milliliters of Bactine. A week later, Annie's body was taken back to Alexandria, Virginia, where she was buried. Her parents, Dan and Mary Jane, refused to accept that their daughter had taken her own life. They questioned the fact that she had driven 80 kilometers to Baltimore just to take her own life. To them, this didn't make sense. Additionally, they pointed out that Annie had a to-do list with several reminders scribbled on the back of her hand when her body was found. Among these reminders were, do homework and say prayers. For Annie's parents, this didn't align with the behavior of a young person about to take their own life. They also questioned how Annie could have opened the Bactine bottle by herself without touching it. As the police report stated, there were no fingerprints from her on the bottle. The parents knew that there was Annie's saliva on the cap and edge of the bottle, but to them, this indicated that someone may have forced her to ingest the liquid. When they received their daughter's body for burial, Dan and Mary Jane noticed trauma on her body, different from what had initially been reported by the authorities. In fact, Dan and Mary Jane were not the only ones who noticed this. The funeral director responsible for the burial preparations, Diane Downey, contacted the McCann family after noticing several marks on Annie's body that she felt contradicted the official autopsy report. Remember, the autopsy report had stated that there were no signs of trauma on the victim's body. Diane Downey, although not a forensic pathologist, had some experience with bodies, having worked at a funeral home for several years. According to her, there were indications on Annie's body that suggested she had been severely beaten and possibly even been a victim of forced sexual relations. There were also reports that the tips of Annie's fingers were wrinkled, as if she had been submerged in water for hours. Additionally, there was a large mark on her forehead that the funeral director found especially suspicious. The Baltimore coroner had described this mark as a small abrasion, not significant, while Diane, the funeral director, argued that it seemed large enough to suggest a blow to the head. There were other marks on Annie's body, one above her eyebrow that her parents said resembled a cigarette burn, and a mysterious pattern near her ankle that resembled the shape of the letter J. Given all of this, the McCanns did not stand idly by and decided to begin their own investigation. They used their savings and also Annie's college fund in the hope of discovering what really happened to their daughter. They hired the famous forensic pathologist Michael Baden and some private detectives to investigate the case. After reviewing the reports about the case, Michael Baden said he was struck by the fact that Annie's body had been found near a trash can, because people typically don't take their own lives near trash cans. But the truth is, it is unclear exactly where Annie supposedly took her own life, since her body was placed behind that trash can by Darnell and his friends, according to Darnell's own testimony. In his more than 50 years of performing autopsies, Michael Baden said he had never heard of someone taking their own life by ingesting Bactine. He stated that, in his opinion, there wouldn't be enough lidocaine in a bottle of Bactine to cause someone's death. Regarding the marks on Annie's body that resembled assaults, Michael said they could be a natural occurrence, essentially patterns formed by blood as it settles in the body after death. The McCanns also contacted Dr. Keith Ablow, a famous psychiatrist who read the case records and wrote to the McCanns saying that it would not be correct to say Annie took her own life. Disappointed and desperate, the McCanns took their fight to Capitol Hill and spoke with Senator Charles Grassley, one of the most powerful senators in the country and chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The senator sent letters to the Baltimore police, the FBI, and also to Bayer, the maker of Bactine. In their responses, the Baltimore police and FBI stood by their investigation and the conclusion that Annie likely died from the self-ingestion of Bactine. However, Bayer claimed that they had previously told the Baltimore police that the company did not believe the amount of lidocaine in a single 150 ml bottle of Bactine would be lethal. 3 months after Annie's death, private detective Jim Consis, hired by the McCann family, found 2 witnesses in a bakery in the Little Italy neighborhood of Baltimore who claimed to have seen Annie. One waitress said Annie was accompanied by another woman, who was described as older, with dark hair, heavy makeup, and very peculiar yellow nail polish that looked like vomit. Based on the waitress's description, a sketch artist created a composite image of the mysterious woman. Jim Consis hoped that finding this woman would help unravel the case, but despite the family releasing the sketch and several leads emerging, the woman was never found. The Baltimore police, represented by Detective Sean Jones, also investigated this lead about the woman, but found no concrete evidence that she was involved in Annie's death. Sean Jones concluded that, although the testimony was relevant, it could not be confirmed and did not contribute to solving the case. As time passed, no new evidence emerged. 3 years after Annie McCann's death, a new murder in Baltimore showed similarities to her case. A 26-year-old woman named Lakeisha Player was found dead, and her car had been stolen. The suspect identified by the police was none other than Darnell Kinlaw, the same man who told the police he placed Annie's body near the trash can because he wanted to take her car for a ride with his friends. However, Detective Sean Jones stated that the cases were quite different, emphasizing that Darnell shot Lakeisha in a domestic violence incident, while Annie's case involved poisoning with lidocaine. At the time, Darnell, who was Lakeisha's boyfriend, shot her multiple times and then stole her car, leaving her body inside his house. Darnell was arrested and sentenced to over 30 years in prison. After this incident, Annie's parents, who didn't know what to do with the family's white Volvo, in which Annie's body was found according to Darnell's statement, decided to donate it to Lakeisha's family. They did this because it appeared that Darnell had destroyed Lakeisha's car after a chase, and her family was left without a vehicle. After Darnell was convicted for the crime against Lakeisha, he was sent to a maximum security prison in Cumberland, Maryland. Annie's parents had always wanted to speak with him to try to obtain as much information as possible about what really happened to their daughter. They then decided to visit him at the maximum security prison. Annie's father, Dan, revealed that they did not believe Darnell was responsible for Annie's death, but they wanted to better understand the circumstances under which he found her car and whether he had any contact with Annie before her death. However, when the McCanns met with Darnell, the criminal was unwilling to speak much and simply said that he knew nothing about Annie's death and had nothing further to contribute to the case. The McCanns continued to criticize the Baltimore Police Department for mishandling the investigation into their daughter's death. The Baltimore police maintained the conclusion that Annie McCann took her own life by ingesting Bactine. The officers cited various things that Annie had written, including the letter she left on her bed, and 2 other letters found among her personal belongings inside the car. According to them, the content of these letters indicated that Annie's mental health was already in decline. The police eventually released the contents, or at least part of it, because Annie's family refused to accept the official theory. In one of these letters, Annie wrote that she was very depressed and suffering from anorexia. According to the authorities, the letter Annie left for her parents, in which she told them not to look for her, had a farewell tone typical of someone intending to take their own life. However, despite the authorities being convinced that Annie took her own life, her parents do not accept this. One thing that intrigues everyone following this case is the fact that the bottle of Bactine did not have Annie's fingerprints on it. There was her saliva on the cap and rim of the bottle, but as mentioned earlier, it would have been impossible for her to open the bottle using only her mouth. This leads many to believe that someone forced Annie to take the Bactine and that, as her parents believe, she was indeed the victim of a crime. Other occurrences have made this case even more intriguing. Annie's heart and brain went missing after the autopsy was conducted. They were neither placed back in her body nor stored by the coroner's office. No one can explain how these organs were lost or who is responsible for it. Unfortunately, this prevents any further forensic or toxicological analysis from being conducted. Additionally, Annie's computer hard drive was also lost by the Baltimore police. Another issue was that the police failed to retrieve the security camera footage from the Perkins Homes neighborhood, where Annie's body was found behind a dumpster. The police department claimed that all the cameras in the area were out of service. However, the city government stated that this was not true. Residents of the neighborhood also confirmed that the cameras had always been operational, including at the time of the crime. Perhaps, if the Baltimore police had pursued the footage from these cameras, there would be no doubts about what really happened to Annie McCann. Regarding the theory proposed by Diane Downey, the funeral director responsible for the burial arrangements, who suggested there were signs that Annie might have been a victim of forced relations, it was refuted. All the pathologists, including the specialist hired by the McCann family, stated that there were no signs of forced relations on the victim. Despite the authorities remaining convinced that Annie McCann took her own life, there are gaps in the case that continue to intrigue many people. But what about you? Do you believe that Annie truly took her own life, or was she the victim of a crime? Share your thoughts in the comments,